Welcome to WikiPodcast. Today we're taking a deep dive into the extraordinary life and political journey of a true history maker, Angela Merkel. Our mission is to understand her unique, quiet power of stability, how a quiet scientist from East Germany rose to lead one of the world's most influential nations for, well, an unprecedented 16 years.
That's right. And this deep dive will trace her remarkable journey chronologically. We'll reveal how her unexpected background profoundly shaped her leadership style and her responses to some of the biggest challenges of our time. Think of this as your essential shortcut to grasping what truly made her such a significant force on the global stage.
Okay, so to really understand Angela Merkel, we have to start at her unusual beginnings. She was born Angela Dorothea Kasner in Hamburg, West Germany in 1954. But here's where it gets really interesting. Just 3 months later, her family made a fascinating and pretty unexpected move to East Germany.
Yeah, it was a deeply significant relocation. You have to remember, her father, a Lutheran pastor, he chose to move his family from the Free West to the Communist East. It was driven by his pastoral duties. So Merkel grew up in the rural Uckermark region, about 90 kilometers north of East Berlin. It was an environment that was deeply controlled and regimented, which undoubtedly forged key aspects of her character.
And her youth certainly seems to reflect that unique setting. I mean, she joined the Free German Youth, the FDJ, that was the official state youth organization. And while it was nominally voluntary, participation was often, well, a practical necessity if you wanted higher education. Yet, interestingly, she still chose to be confirmed in the church rather than participate in the secular Jugendweihe ceremony.
Right, the common coming-of-age ritual. And her academic talents were just, well, undeniable from an early age. She mastered Russian, earning prizes in both language and mathematics. She completed her schooling with a perfect average grade of 1.0. That's like the top A grade in the German system. This early display of rigorous discipline and analytical thinking really laid the groundwork for her systematic approach later on.
And that academic path continued directly into her higher education, right? She studied physics at Karl Marx University, Leipzig, from 73 to 78. And following that, she pursued postgraduate work at the Central Institute for Physical Chemistry in Berlin-Adlershof, staying there right up until 1990.
And she earned her doctorate in quantum chemistry in 1986, establishing herself as a serious research scientist. But what's truly revealing about her character from this period is a specific anecdote you often hear. Her famous refusal to become an informant for the Stasi, East Germany's notorious secret police. She apparently cited an inability to keep secrets, pragmatic even then.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it wasn't just a simple rejection. It really hinted at a quiet, principled resistance and maybe a foundational aversion to the duplicity inherent in a regime built on surveillance.
Yeah.
Qualities that would later define her approach to transparent, fact-based governance.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener? How might growing up within the constraints of East Germany and then immersing herself in the objective logic of science, how might that have shaped her famously methodical, pragmatic approach to problem solving that really defined her political career? It sounds like a deeply formative period.
Oh, absolutely. That combination of navigating a strict system and developing a scientific mindset, it instilled in her a deep-seated pragmatism, a reliance on facts over ideology, and a kind of strategic caution. She learned to observe, analyze, and wait for the right moment. She tended to avoid grand gestures in favor of, tangible results.
Then comes the fall of the Berlin Wall in November 1989. That wasn't just a historic event. It was the unexpected spark that ignited her political career almost overnight, it seems.
It truly was. She immediately joined Democratic Awakening, or DA, one of the new pro-democracy parties forming in East Germany. And by February 1990, her sharp intellect and calm demeanor quickly propelled her to become its press spokeswoman.
And she faced a real baptism by fire almost immediately, didn't she?
She did.
Just weeks before East Germany's first democratic election, the DA leader, Wolfgang Schnurr, was exposed as a Stasi informant. Big scandal. And Merkel's calm and, frankly, exceptionally effective handling of the ensuing media storm, the intense scrutiny, it deeply impressed Lothar de Maizière.
Right, who would soon become East Germany's last prime minister. Her coolness under pressure was already evident, and her political evolution just accelerated from there. Democratic Awakening eventually merged with the East German Christian Democratic Union, which then, after reunification, united with its more powerful Western counterpart. This basically placed her directly in the mainstream of German politics, ready for a larger role.
And that larger role came swiftly. She was elected to the Bundestag, the German parliament, in 1990. representing a district in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. And she quickly caught the eye of Chancellor Helmut Kohl,
The chancellor himself.
who saw her potential and famously, perhaps a bit patronizingly now, referred to her as "my girl."
Yeah, ein Mädchen. Kohl's patronage definitely opened doors for her.
Mm.
From 1991 to 1994, she served as Minister for Women and Youth. And in that role, she was instrumental in codifying the right to preschool education. What's telling, though, is that despite her personal opposition to abortion, she chose to abstain during the vote to loosen abortion laws.
Interesting.
It really highlights that pragmatic streak early on, prioritizing practical governance over maybe rigid ideological adherence.
Then, from 94 to 98, she moved to a higher profile role, Minister for the Environment and Nuclear Safety. Now, this portfolio gave her significant national and international visibility. She played a key part in setting up the 1995 Berlin Climate Change Conference.
That was a big one.
Yeah, which achieved the first international commitment to greenhouse gas reduction, a clear indicator of her early focus on global issues.
Definitely. And after the CDU's electoral defeat in 1998, she became General Secretary of the party. Now, it was during this period, as the CDU grappled with a huge party funding scandal involving her former mentor Kohl, that Merkel made a really bold, defining move. She publicly criticized Kohl in a newspaper article.
Against her own mentor.
Exactly, advocating for a fresh start for the party. This decisive action, turning against her patron, showed her independent resolve and, frankly, her strategic foresight. It positioned her as the leader needed to reform the party.
So if we just connect this to the bigger picture, you can see how Merkel, initially seen as this quiet figure, strategically navigated these, well, treacherous political waters. She consistently demonstrated a keen sense of timing and an ability to seize opportunities, even when it meant breaking with powerful figures like Kohl.
This brings us to a really compelling question, I think. How did a centrist Protestant woman from northern Germany with a scientific background, how did she become the first female leader of the predominantly male, socially conservative and Catholic-rooted CDU in April 2000? It seems almost, well, improbable.
Well, her rise to leader of the opposition from 2002 to 2005 was a bit of a masterpiece of shrewd political maneuvering. After what became known as the Wolfratshausen Breakfast, this crucial internal party meeting, she strategically ceded the chancellorship challenge to Edmund Stoiber. He was seen as maybe the more popular figure within the party at that moment.
Okay.
But in doing so, she secured the leadership of the combined CDU-CSU faction in the Bundestag. This gave her immense power and a very visible platform, regardless of the election outcome. Very clever. Right. And once in that powerful position, she didn't shy away from clear policy stances. As opposition leader, she pushed for pretty substantial reforms to Germany's economic and social systems. She advocated for more pro-market policies, things like removing barriers to laying off employees, increasing work hours, signaling a clear shift in economic direction.
And on foreign policy, she strongly supported a robust transatlantic partnership. Notably, she advocated for the 2003 invasion of Iraq at the time, although she later nuanced her stance on that. She also favored what she called a privileged partnership over full EU membership for Turkey, so setting a distinct direction there too.
Then came the 2005 federal election. That was quite the battle, wasn't it?
It was very close.
She secured the CDU-CSU nomination to challenge the incumbent Gerhard Schroeder. But her campaign faced challenges. Remember, she confused gross and net income during a televised debate.
I do. That didn't help.
And there were the unpopular flat tax and VAT increase proposals put forward by her finance minister pick, Paul Kirchhoff.
Exactly. So the election result itself was this unprecedented stalemate. Both her party and Schroeder's SPD initially claimed victory. It led to 3 weeks of really tense negotiations. And this ultimately resulted in her becoming chancellor, leading a grand coalition with the SPD.
Making history.
Absolutely. First woman, first chancellor from former East Germany. And her initial promise to the nation was simple: reduce unemployment.
What's truly fascinating here is how she actually ascended to the chancellery. It wasn't through overwhelming public charisma, was it? It was more through this unique blend of pragmatism, meticulous political maneuvering, and just an undeniable ability to navigate complex negotiations and crises. So when she became chancellor, Merkel's 16-year tenure was just overwhelmingly defined by her navigation of a relentless series of unprecedented crises. Let's unpack some of those key challenges and how she responded.
Yeah, it seemed like one crisis after another. Her first grand coalition from 2005 to 2009 was almost immediately consumed by the 2008 global financial crisis and then the Eurozone crisis that followed. She was initially cautious, criticized Ireland's blanket guarantee for deposits,
Right.
but then reversed course to implement broad guarantees for German bank deposits. A critical move. She's widely credited, with saving the euro through her coordinating role in setting up debt relief mechanisms for struggling member states. Though, it has to be said, this also drew criticism for imposing harsh austerity measures on debtor nations like Greece.
True.
Crucially, though, domestically, she significantly expanded Germany's Kurzarbeit program, that's the short-time work scheme.
Yeah.
And it's widely recognized for saving maybe 500,000 jobs during that economic downturn.
Then she was reelected in 2009, this time leading a CDU-FDP coalition until 2013. And during this term, she made a significant domestic policy change by abolishing conscription in 2011. That transformed the Bundeswehr into a volunteer military. Popular at the time, maybe.
Yes, largely popular then. But that decision has faced renewed scrutiny, especially after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Recent polls actually show a majority of Germans now favoring reestablishing conscription. Hindsight is 20/20, I suppose.
Indeed.
Her second grand coalition from 2013 to 2017 followed a decisive election victory in 2013. But this period became almost entirely defined by the 2015 European migrant crisis. She famously declared, "Wir schaffen das," we can do this.
A phrase that echoed around the world.
It did, and she controversially suspended the Dublin regulation, that's the EU rule on asylum claims, for Syrian refugees. This led to nearly 1.1 million asylum seekers entering Germany that year alone.
And this period also saw significant domestic opposition to her migrant policy, especially from her own sister party, the Bavarian CSU, and it certainly fueled the rise of the anti-immigration alternative for Germany, the AfD party. She did later tighten asylum policy in response to these pressures, didn't she?
Yes, she adjusted course. Her actions during the migrant crisis earned her the UN Nansen Award in 2022 for courage and compassion. Yet she also faced substantial criticism for what some critics viewed as hypocritically unilateral early policymaking. It's complex.
Very complex.
Her final term, the Third Grand Coalition from 2018 to 2021, actually commenced after the longest post-war coalition negotiations in German history. Took ages.
And that final term started with yet another major hurdle, a significant government crisis in 2018. A fierce conflict erupted with her interior minister, Horst Seehofer from the CSU, over migrant policy again. But Merkel skillfully resolved it through a compromise on tighter border controls, successfully averting a government collapse.
She had a knack for finding those compromises. And finally, her chancellorship concluded amidst the global COVID-19 pandemic. She quickly established a crisis team and advocated for a measured and moderate approach. Her widely publicized March 2020 speech, where she starkly compared the pandemic's challenges to World War II, that was exceptionally well received.
I remember that speech. It was powerful.
It was. Recognized as Speech of the Year. She was also praised internationally for her clear, accessible explanations of complex public health metrics, like the R number. Very much the scientist again.
So, as her time in office drew to a close, Merkel made a very definitive announcement back in October 2018. She said she would not seek re-election as CDU leader or chancellor in 2021 and had no plans for any further political office. A true quiet exit.
A very deliberate stepping back. Her political positions and their long-term impact are, well, vast and complex to summarize. On immigration, for instance, she stated back in 2010 that attempts to build a multicultural society in Germany had utterly failed.
I remember that caused a stir.
It did. Yet later, she supported a mandatory solidarity mechanism for asylum seekers across the EU. It shows her evolving pragmatism, perhaps, facing new realities. In foreign policy, she really championed strengthening European cooperation and international trade agreements, particularly through the Wandel-durch-Handel change through trade policy, the idea that economic ties foster political change.
Which is now being questioned, especially regarding Russia.
Exactly. She was widely considered the de facto leader of the European Union for much of her tenure. But as you said, post-2022, she's faced significant criticism for increasing Germany's dependence on Russian gas, and maybe for neglecting the Bundeswehr's capabilities.
And regarding social expenditure, she had some strong views there too.
She did. She famously highlighted at the World Economic Forum in 2013 that Europe, with only 7% of the global population and 25% of GDP, accounts for almost 50% of global social spending. Her point was always that innovation was absolutely key to maintaining prosperity in such a system. You couldn't just rely on the old ways.
Makes sense.
And in climate policy, she drove ambitious renewable energy targets and the Energiewende, Germany's big energy transition program, committing to phasing out nuclear power and eventually coal by 2038. Big commitments.
Huge.
Though despite significant budget allocations, her climate policies later faced criticism for maybe not being aggressive enough to meet those ambitious targets.
So let's consider her public image and her enduring legacy. I mean, Time Magazine's Person of the Year in 2015, commentators like Hillary Clinton calling her the liberal West's last defender, and even leader of the free world. High praise.
Absolutely. And she accrued various nicknames throughout her career, didn't she? From Iron Lady, that comparison to Margaret Thatcher, to Mutti, meaning mother, and even Iron Chancellor, like Otto von Bismarck.
Quite a range.
It is. While the Iron Lady comparison points to her strength and that scientific rigor, her steadfastly pro-European, less my way or the highway approach clearly distinguished her from Thatcher.
And her influence was so profound, it extended to the Merkel-Kinder, right? The generation that grew up entirely under her chancellorship. That must have indelibly shaped their perceptions of Germany's political landscape and leadership style.
Definitely. It's a whole generation knowing only her at the helm. But it's important to acknowledge some notable criticisms as well. We touched on some already. She faced scrutiny for her presence at an award ceremony for Danish cartoonist Kurt Westergaard amidst the Mohammed cartoons controversy, though she always condemned things like Quran burning. The term alternativos, meaning without an alternative, which she used frequently for her crisis measures.
Yes, that became infamous.
It did. Named Unword of the Year in 2010, and even, ironically, inspired the name of the AfD party, Alternative for Germany. And her comment in 2013 that internet is Newland, uncharted territory, well, that led to widespread internet memes and online mockery.
Yeah, that didn't land well.
It highlighted a rare moment where her pragmatism maybe seemed a bit out of touch with the digital age.
So, as we reflect on her remarkable run, how do you think Angela Merkel's long and complex legacy, marked by both profound stability and, let's face it, significant criticism, how will it ultimately be viewed in the years to come, especially as global events continue to unfold so rapidly?
It's the big question, isn't it? After stepping down in December 2021, she has largely limited her political involvement, sticking to, as she put it, feel-good events. However, she did publicly condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine. She also defended her controversial 2008 decision to block Ukraine's NATO membership. Her argument was it was to prevent further escalation with Russia at the time. Still debated, of course.
Of course.
Her memoir, Freedom, Memories 1954-2021, came out in November 2024, offering her personal reflections. And she even attended the first round of voting for Friedrich Merz as chancellor in May 2025. A rare public political appearance.
Just a few personal notes that kind of add color to her public persona. She was married twice, has no children but 2 stepsons. She's known to be a fervent football fan.
Yes, often seen at matches.
And she has a known fear of dogs, stemming from a 1995 attack. Famously highlighted when Vladimir Putin brought his Labrador retriever into a press conference in 2007.
Widely seen as an intentional power play by Putin.
Seems likely. And finally, after largely evading the question for most of her career, she publicly declared herself a feminist in 2021.
Right, at the end of her tenure.
Given her long tenure and consistently measured approach to navigating crises, how much did Angela Merkel's quiet power of stability truly shape Germany and Europe? And what lessons can be drawn from her unique journey from East German scientist to global leader? Thanks for listening. Write us your opinion on how Angela Merkel's quiet and pragmatic leadership influenced the role of women in global politics and leadership in the comments. Subscribe to the channel to help more listeners reach our episodes. Thank you and have an amazing day.